Okay. Good morning and welcome to the Records Management Network event for PROV. My name is May RMN and thank you for joining us today. I'll hand over to Justine shortly, just a couple of housekeeping announcements. We are recording this event and it will be available on the PROV website in due course. Cameras and microphones are switched off for all but the presenters. So too is the chat function, and we will not respond to raised hands. We have a Q&A function. You can enter any questions you have for the presenters or myself. If you're having any technical difficulties, just reach out and just please type this into the Q&A. Each presenter will have a few minutes at the end of their presentation to answer questions or can respond by the Q&A. And that's it. So now I'll hand over to our director, Justine, to formally get us started.
Thanks, Marianne. Hi, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting today, wherever you may be. I myself am on the lands of the Wurundjeri. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to any other elders who may be present today. As Marianne said, I'm Justine Hazelwood. I'm the Director and Keeper of Public Records at the Public Record Office Victoria, and I'd like to welcome you to the first Records Management Network event for 2022. We have a great range of presenters today who will share their experiences of record keeping and managing digital strategy and information. But before we begin, I'd like to give everybody a few updates on what PROV has been doing. Some of you will have been involved with our standards redevelopment project. We are currently finalising the redeveloped disposal standard. Once issued, that will be the end of the standards redevelopment project. So I'd like to thank everybody who has provided feedback and commentary on that, on those redeveloped standards. It's been a great help to make sure that they actually meet the needs of people working with records out in agencies. This project has seen the merging of the VERS standard framework, that is our digital record strategy framework, and the record keeping standards framework. So they're all together, no distinction between digital and paper, as it should be. This has actually also simplified the standards framework in that it's reduced the number of documents and the requirements to ensure that standards can be applied to all business systems and storage environments. And again, thank you to everyone who has provided feedback. We've also developed and just recently issued a value and risk policy that addresses the need for agencies to prioritise efforts and resources in a complex environment and in often a resource constrained environment. We understand that, so we've provided some guidance on the decision making that you should take to prioritise which areas of your businesses you would be focusing your attention on. I'd like to thank everyone again for providing feedback on the priority functions review for the Common Administrative Records Retention and Disposal Authority. So we are redeveloping that disposal authority, and based on your feedback, we've committed to revising the sections covering personnel, occupational health and safety, industrial relations, and staff development. And we're currently researching and drafting and getting advice from departmental HR staff and the team at Digital Victoria, who are also developing a new human capital management system. So we're trying to make sure that the disposal authorisation matches into the capabilities of the new system. So that should make life a lot easier in terms of managing HR records. We are still continuing our Public Records Act review. It is taking some time, but we are working with the Department of Premier and Cabinet on that, developing reform proposals, which will eventually go up to ministers for decision making. In terms of our transfer program, we are back and up and running with that. We've got around 30 transfer projects we're working on at the moment. Some highlights of those. We have been working with the Queenscliff Maritime Museum to complete a large and complex appraisal and transfer project of records that actually belong to Ports Victoria, and they were housed at the Queenscliff Maritime Museum for a number of years. The collection is just over 11,000 records, including about 10,000 hydrographic survey plans of Victoria's coastlines, bays and inland waterways, plus plans of harbour infrastructure and miscellaneous records. All of those are on open access, so we expect that that will be a bit of a treasure trove for people who are interested in, I guess, the riverways and waterways of Victoria, including the coastline. We are working with Cabinet Office at the Department of Premier and Cabinet to transfer Cabinet records. So with final transfers for 2021 occurring and planning underway for the caretaker period, which will commence in November of this year. So we are right on top of Cabinet records transfer, which is great news. In terms of transfers from Royal Commissions, we have transfer of permanent records from inquiry bodies continuing in collaboration with, again, the Department of Premier and Cabinet. So we've received approximately 200,000 VOs, that is our digital records format, for ingest into our digital archive from the Royal Commission into the Management of Police Informants. Again, a really important Royal Commission, and great that we're getting those records so promptly. In terms of probate records from the Supreme Court, we've got a transfer of 2017 probate records underway from the Registrar of Probates, and that was recently actually completed, so not underway but completed, which comprised almost 22,000 probate files. It's the largest physical transfer to occur to date using our new archival management system. We're currently working to implement our new systems into our regional repositories and regional archives. So we're currently working in Bendigo to get the Bendigo Regional Archive Centre up and running. The system will also be installed at our Ballarat Archive Centre at the Eureka Centre, and at our offline records storage repository that belongs to the State Library of Victoria in Ballarat. So the work is underway for that. That will allow us to actually move 10 kilometres of non or rarely used records to that State Library facility in Ballarat, and that will free up some space at the Victorian Archives Centre. That transfer consists of about 55,000 boxes and will take approximately 5 months to complete. But as I said, we'll free up some space for more immediate transfers into the Victorian Archives Centre, so that's great news. In training, we are developing a digital record keeping module that will partner with our existing record keeping essentials e-learning module. This will be a free online module designed for records management practitioners, business and project managers and system owners to increase their understanding of digital record keeping. We would be really pleased to hear from anybody who would like to provide us with feedback on that during its development. We want to make sure it's useful and valuable. So any feedback that you can provide us would be very greatly received. Gratefully received, I should say. We will be running the Sir Rupert Hamer Records Management Awards for Record Keeping Excellence and Innovation in 2022-23. Keep an eye out for information about this and start thinking about projects that you should be applying for an award for. Record keepers are a bit reticent, I think, don't like to big note themselves maybe, but please think about any projects you've been involved in that have gone really well or had great outcomes, because we would love to hear from you for an award. We're also pleased to announce able to participate once again with the National Archives of Australia in Melbourne's annual open house program. We'll be returning to on-site tours on Saturday, the 30th of July. For the past 2 years, we've been running them virtually, but it'll be great to get people back in the building and having a look around. People always really enjoy getting that back of house understanding of how an archive works. So it's a great opportunity. This year's theme is Built, Unbuilt. So we'll also be showcasing some records related to that theme within our collection. So let's get started. Again, just reiterating what Marianne said, if you have any questions of speakers, please ask them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Each speaker will have time at the end of their presentation to answer them. And also just noting the chat function is disabled. We won't be answering raised hands, so please use the Q&A. So let's start. So our first speaker today is the Deputy CEO of Digital Victoria, Lisa Tepper. She will be speaking to you about the Victorian Government's digital strategy, which I think you'll find fascinating. So please welcome Lisa.
Morning, and thank you, Justine. Thanks so much for having me along to this session today. I'm really excited to talk about the whole of Victorian Government digital strategy that we released last November. So it went through Cabinet and we had a public release in November last year. And yeah, also really happy to take questions about what that might mean for the work you do. And I'm also going to cover off a little bit about, as a result of the strategy, we formed an organisation called Digital Victoria in Department of Premier and Cabinet in April last year, and we got a new CEO in September. So I thought it might be worth talking a little bit about the work that Digital Victoria is going to lead across Vic Government as well, that might be of interest. So I'll just share my screen and then I'll get started. And I hope everyone had a nice start on this icy morning in Victoria. Okay. Can you see that? Yeah, thanks. All right. So I'll just kick off with, so we kicked off a process to create the new strategy in 2021. There was a whole Victorian Government IT strategy from 2016 to 2020. And that strategy focused quite a lot on internal back office government systems and what we might do to transform those. It did create the Victorian Centre for Data Insights and the cyber unit out of that strategy. Those are two things we didn't have in Victoria before that strategy. But a couple of things sort of on reflection in terms of that strategy were it probably didn't focus enough on how government interacts with the community and citizens. So it missed that element, and also it's quite difficult to implement these whole of Victorian government strategies. So it's great to set a kind of bold ambition, but it's quite difficult given the way Vic Government works to implement things that are cross Vic Government, because it's a very much a federated environment. So we set out to create the strategy, and we wanted it to be three things really: holistic, so to really take into account all of departments and agencies across Vic Government, but also community interactions, business interactions, and government, and how we work. We wanted it to be ambitious, so really to set an ambitious goal, given Victoria as a state is probably not seen as a leader necessarily in digital compared to, say, for example, New South Wales or other jurisdictions globally. Estonia is always held up, and Singapore. So we really wanted to set an ambitious goal, but we also lastly wanted it to be implementable. So we really wanted to think about what are some of the barriers that have been in place over the last few years that have made it difficult to implement digital transformation, and what could we do to address those barriers. And the idea is that it's a whole of government holistic strategy, but we need strategies that sit underneath it across things like cyber, data, skills, etc. So there is a whole of the government cyber strategy that was released last year as well, and we're actually currently working on the data one, which may be of interest to some of you. So if you are interested in engaging on that, let me know and I can put you in contact with the right people. We've done a couple of months of work on it and quite a bit of consultation, and we're working through sort of final revisions on that and hoping to take it to our minister shortly. I'll just go to the next slide. So as I said, we consulted pretty widely to create the whole Victorian Government digital strategy. And I thought it might be worth talking about what we heard. What we heard from people was, firstly, it's quite challenging to get investment into digital transformation in Victoria, especially, for example, if you're trying to address a legacy issue. The process to seek funding is challenging, and it's challenging to make a case around digital. So that's something we took on board when we were looking at creating the new strategy. We also heard that often digital is not considered when at the kind of start of a project or even a policy decision. So we heard that sometimes significant policy decisions are made without people who understand the technology and the digital transformation that might be required to deliver them in the room. And sometimes that can lead to decisions that are quite difficult to actually implement on the ground. You know, for example, sometimes it might be a legislative change that requires significant change to happen all on a single day, and just not having thought through what that means in terms of the technology we need to support that. And also from citizens. So we took some survey data from Service Victoria. So they surveyed, I think it's nearly 2,000 Victorians. And this was March 2021, so before some of the pandemic impacts of mid-2021, vax certificates, all of that work. But what they did hear from Victorians even then was only 8% were what we called digital abstainers. So they were people who said, no matter what you do, I do not want to interact with government digitally. There was, you know, a significant proportion who were happy to do it, but others who were a bit skeptical. And their view was, as long as you make this easy for me, I will consider using it. So that was significant for us in saying that that's 92% of Victorians who will deal with the government through digital means if you make it a good and easy to use service. So what we came up with, the strategy has 3 key pillars, and they're across the community and citizens, the public sector and the economy. So in terms of the community, it was about creating better, fairer, and more accessible services. And what we mean by that is setting a direction in Victoria that any digital or technology service we put in place will genuinely put the citizen at the centre of it and try to make it as easy for them as possible to use that service. And I think one I thought I might touch on is underneath that, you'll see one of the outcomes we're seeking is personalisation on your terms. So we really wanted to make it clear that we need to work towards personalising services for citizens if they want that. And that does require, you know, a data exchange and for them to share their data with government so we can just determine what it is that they need. And I thought a good example of where we worked to do that last year was the Service Victoria app and the vaccination certificates in that app. I was closely involved in, there's a lot of collaboration required between Commonwealth Government and state governments to make that happen. And one of the things we wanted to make sure of is that data, which is very personal to citizens, was held only on their phone, and it was something you could opt into, but it did make your life easier if you did so. So we really tried to operationalise that outcome and that intent in a way that we built the vax certificate solution. I will say it was obviously imperfect. We had to do it very quickly, but I think it was generally, as a digital solution, well received. I won't go into how people felt about the policy, the health policy, because that wasn't part of what we were working on. In terms of the digital ready public sector, a couple of things there. One, this evidence-based decision-making and co-design policy, like really trying to make sure we're using data and we're thinking about digital and technology when we're making significant policy decisions. And the other piece was digital mindset, skills and ways of working, and I'll touch on that in a moment, but what we're doing about that. But we did hear that we really need to uplift capability across Vic government end-to-end in digital, and by that I mean we need our executive cohort to understand digital and technology enough to be able to make the policy decisions that they're making. We've got a lot of deep technical people who we need to make sure we're providing opportunities for them to professionally develop themselves. And then thirdly, we need to make sure that our frontline service delivery teams actually have the skills they need to make the most of the technology that's made available to them. Even, you know, things like Microsoft Office Suite has significant capability in it as a suite of tools, and we don't always necessarily invest in training our frontline workers in how to make the best of those platforms that they have access to. And lastly, the third pillar is a thriving digital economy. There's a lot of work going on in that space across, certainly in the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions, but also in education. So we wanted to highlight that work is already happening. So I think that DJPR are going to release a digital inclusion strategy this year. So they've been working on that aspect. One of the things we wanted to focus on and that we can influence in sort of central agency is procurement policy. We certainly heard loud and clear from everyone we spoke to that it can be very difficult to purchase the kind of IT skills, the kind of platforms, and engage with vendors in the way you need to in digital and technology, given some of our policy positions and just the way that the procurement process works. Now, there's lots of very good reasons around probity that we have some of those policies and processes in place. So we're not looking to unwind those, but we are looking at how we might make that easier. And we are working on something called a digital marketplace to be released later this year to really start to address that. I won't go through this slide because it's far too dense, so I apologise, but we did come up with kind of key pillars around the areas we needed to work in, and you'll see how they align in the next slide to the work we're doing in Digital Victoria. So in terms of the areas we want to focus in on in Digital Victoria, because we see our role as enabling the digital strategy. So we can't deliver it all. This is a whole government strategy, but there's a number of things we could do through a central agency that would help make it easier for people to deliver on their digital transformation agendas. So we became an entity in April last year. It consolidated a number of kind of digital and technology branches that existed in DPC but were sort of running separately. So that we had a cyber unit, the Victorian Centre for Data Insights, my team, which led the strategy work, and also a couple of the teams that run significant platforms. So some of you may be aware of the website consolidation program called Single Digital Presence. And I know, Justine, you mentioned the Common Corporate Platforms program, which is seeking to implement consistent corporate platforms across all of the Victorian government departments, the major ones. So it's a significant program, but if we get it right, we'll mean that we're all working in a consistent way and we'll make things easier. So key areas we're focusing on: agile portfolio investment. So one of the things we did this year was actually support the review of all of the ERC budget bids. What we wanted to do there was start to provide an expert voice on digital and technology investment into that process. So if a bid looked like it had a significant digital transformation in it, we were able to provide advice. And that advice was around, does this look like a good idea? Also, do we already have this capability somewhere else in Vic government? So maybe we could reuse that, those kind of things. So it was a really effective process. We learned a lot as well about the demand that's out there. So for example, where we're seeing where most departments are seeking to invest in things like websites, contact centres, CRM systems. So it's really good to start to see holistically where people are seeking investment so we can start to provide advice in that space. And that leads into digital policy strategy and governance. So one of the key things we're seeking to do in Digital Victoria is to set a sort of strategically coordinate across the government and set direction and look for opportunities for collaboration and therefore efficiencies. So that's what we're seeking to do there. Thirdly, technology platforms. So our intent is not to build a bunch of centralized technology platforms. Our intent is to look for opportunities to reuse platforms that exist, but kind of look at this opportunities end to end. So by that I mean, in some areas where, say, everybody needs a CRM system, the best thing for the government to do is to have an appropriate contract in place with a couple of vendors that everybody can utilise, because that's how we make use of our scale and get efficiencies. all the way to the other end where, say, the Common Corporate Platforms program, it might make sense to actually have a central and template or a central system that everyone can reuse. So there's a lot of and there's a lot of opportunities in the middle where it might just be that departments can share resources, share skilled people, or share a template. So if you've implemented a particular system, you could potentially template that and other people could reuse your template. People, process and partners. So on this one, I'll touch on, I mentioned upskilling. So one of the things we've kicked off this year is something called Digital Academy. We're not seeking to create our own single online learning platform. This is about a collaborative ecosystem. So there's lots of great content out there across Vic government. We want to find a way to put that in a place where people can access it easily. And the other thing we are doing is we've started a program with MIT. So given the feedback we heard about making sure executives understand digital transformation, we ran a 2-day event with MIT back in March, and we'll run some more of those where we got senior people across Vic government to come in for 2 days and understand what digital transformation means from the MIT crew. So it was a really great event actually, and we're looking forward to doing some more of those. I mentioned the data strategy, so number 5, that is in train. And lastly, security and privacy. There was a cyber strategy released last year. We're doing some work to put plans in place to implement that strategy. A good example of something that's being set up right now is the security operations centres. So we're setting up a number of those across the government at the moment. So I will stop sharing there. I think I've probably talked long enough. Really happy to take questions. I hope that was of interest to people and or connect you with the right people across the government or in DPC on this work. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lisa. Let's just see if there's any questions come through. People just saying thank you. It's such a, there's no questions in the Q&As yet, but it is such a complex topic, isn't it, to try and get your head around. I suppose one of my questions, and you touched a little bit on this, is what are some of the common questions, or what do you see as some of the common challenges that you have got since, you know, with people implementing the strategy or trying to implement the strategy?
Yeah, I think the challenges we saw around investment and skills are not going to be ones that we solve overnight. So we are chipping away at that, but I think that's going to take some time. So we certainly see those challenges continuing to be a challenge. And even, you know, the recent, we're all in a fiscal environment where it's quite tight. So we see our role as really trying to help people look for efficiencies and ways to potentially get the investment they need through reusing, you know, what might have been built somewhere else across the government. But yeah, those two challenges I think remain and will continue to be things we need to continuously work on.
We've also had a question with regards, have we got some more information about the Digital Academy?
Yeah, sure, I can. Why don't I take an action to share with the Prov team kind of the publicly available link to that, and then we can share that with you.
Yeah, that would be great. And we've also got, is there any work being done in the procurement space to enable gov entities to leverage contracts made by other departments, particularly in the technology space?
Yeah, that is such a good question. So yes, there are a number of state purchase contracts available at the moment. I think the only one that's mandated in Victoria, I saw the note about federal, is the telco one. But if, you know, the likes of sort of
This meeting is being recorded.
Apologies, everyone. We've had a slight technical difficulty. Hopefully we should be back in now. Let's get everyone a minute. Hopefully we can get everyone back. Looks like Lisa's coming back in. Hi, Lisa. Apologies.
Sorry, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, it just died on all of us, unfortunately, but we are back. Sorry, it was such an interesting question, and it got cut off.
Oh, right. So we all got cut off at the same time. So.
Yeah.
Do you want me to answer that question, and then I think I'm probably
yeah. And then we'll move on. Yeah, we've got a little bit of time.
So opportunities to leverage contracts, absolutely yes, was my answer. So we do have state purchase contracts in place for large organizations where we all use their services, such as Microsoft. They don't tend to be mandated, but please do get in contact with us, because there's a team in Digital Victoria whose job it is to manage those whole of government, either leverageable or state purchase contracts. There's technically some slight differences in them from a policy perspective, so we can make them leverageable, or we can actually make them a state purchase contract. To do that, we have to sort of work with the Victorian Government Purchasing Board, etc. And we're also keen to hear from people as to where they think it would be beneficial to have more of those. So we meet regularly with the CIOs of large departments, and they give us their kind of insights on what everyone's buying, and it would make sense to have something that we could all use. But yeah, also keen to hear from others. Thanks.
Okay. There are a couple more questions that have come in. How are we going for time? We're good. Curious as to how the strategy fits into the VPDS, if there is still time to answer. Yeah, thinking of Standard 11.
Yes, so there's probably more detail to come on that out of the data strategy, and it was certainly considered in the cyber strategy. It is a very good question, and we have consulted with OVIC on both the digital strategy and the data strategy. So maybe I might hold off on the specifics of that until we get the data strategy out, which I think would be more relevant.
Fantastic, that's great. And one last one, resourcing is a big issue. Are there any funding resources for agencies to obtain funding for digital transformation projects?
The same funding options that are available to all of us, and I should say we also have to put in our own budget bids, but through that investment management process and working with DTF, what we want to start to do is make it provide a expert voice into their decisions on those things. So I think in the past people have felt that perhaps they didn't understand what was being asked for, or didn't understand, the legacy risk wasn't kind of articulated in a way that was compelling. And so we want to start to help maybe change the template that we use for budget bids, work with DTF to help them review those bids in a way that I hope we will secure more investment for digital. That said, I think our estimate is we're spending $3 billion a year across the government in this space. So I'm sure our friends at DTF will also ask us to find ways to be more efficient in the way that we do that. So, but we know it's an issue, and we're seeking to assist where we can.
Fantastic. I think that's right on time.
All right.
Justine, I might pass back to you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Lisa. That was great. Okay, so now we turn to record keeping in universities, and we have with us today Kim Burrell from Victoria University. She is stepping in for Anna Mitrovic, who couldn't be with us today. Kim is the University Archivist from Victoria University, and she will be talking about how record keeping works in the university environment. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Yes, I'll just attempt to share my screen, and host is disabled. screen sharing.
So since we've had to, it's reset the settings,
Yes.
change it, and you should be good to go.
Yeah.
Great.
Sorry. Right, can everybody see that? Great. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I have stepped in on behalf of Anna. So it's just a slightly collaborative effort, and I'm sure that it will take a different course from Anna's initial intentions for this presentation. So I've combined some of my thoughts and also the thoughts of other members of our team. But I suppose that the perspective that I bring to this is quite different from a strictly records keeping perspective, because my role is university archivist. So I am part of the Records and Archive Services team, and certainly we work very collaboratively with the rest of the university. But the archive sort of sits in a slightly different position in most institutions, in the sense that this is sort of the repository of the university's memory, I suppose, and it's the place where the records of all of its predecessors are also gathered together. I'm very, very firmly of the belief that archives are extremely important, and I think that the last couple of years has really reinforced that for me, and really brought home for me that archives are the way that we document changes and development, and that they are very dynamic things. It's a practice, it is dynamic, it is very much in the present. And I think that one of the challenges, possibly from my perspective, has been to keep that as front of mind for my colleagues in the university, and more broader, more professionally. I think we're very, very conscious of the challenges of the last 2 years and how it's affected our profession, and you know, archivists and records managers and professionals in all sectors. So I'm just going to move on to explaining a bit about what we do at Victoria University. So this is our very tiny team. We at the moment, we are part of the library structure. We have recently been re-merged with the library, having been under that management system in 2016 when I arrived, and then having been moved to legal branch, and now we're back with the library. So our manager is actually the associate librarian responsible for, it's in the next slide, but I mean, that alone is quite a recent change, but it is also one of the many sort of changes that's been that roll along in this sector and have happened the last couple of years. So I think it's not an uncommon it's not an uncommon position for records and archive services to be in the university sector, and neither is the constant shifting of these roles between different management groups, management umbrellas. So Anna is our manager, Records and Archive Services. We have a record system administrator who has recently been quite integral in implementing our new ERMS. We then have a senior records officer who looks after virtually all of the record keeping issues for the whole department, for the whole university. Then there is myself. Student records have been virtually on board continuously throughout the last 2 years, because that's a continuous, obviously a continuing necessity for the university. The other thing that I think that possibly relates to what I've just said is that there's a level of complexity about the sorts of record keeping that that we have at VU, and we're not alone, which is contributed to by the fact that it's a dual sector institution, so it comprises a traditional university structure, but also we have a vocational education and training institution, which offers TAFE, which contributes to a quite complex relationship with different levels of both state and Commonwealth government legislations, and in working environments, and certainly record keeping environments and instruments, and also that we have multiple campuses across Victoria, New South Wales, and also overseas. One of the things I think that has helped VU in over the last, well, since early 2020 is that we teach a different model of education. So we teach with a block model, which means that you only take one subject at a time over a 4-week period of very intense learning. But that has enabled VU to move quite easily with relative ease to putting those courses on, delivering those courses online, and so that the university's been able to sort of really largely continue as it may once have, without the face-to-face component, but throughout the pandemic. And we have a really fantastic IT department and really fantastic learning development capacity. So I think that's contributed to us to being able to sort of adapt really quickly. I don't want to say that word, pivot, but we do seem to have been remarkably resilient and adaptable in this time. So a little bit about record, about just a general what we've been working on in the last couple of years, and some of the experiences from the different areas. Now the main thing I think that has been achieved by our work group is that over the last 2 years, the electronic records management system has been implemented successfully, and that development of that began several years ago, and planning, at which point I was involved, but I can't answer too many technical details about this because actually after the planning stage, I haven't really been too much involved in the actual implementation, except at testing level. But I think I really want to acknowledge that I think this is an incredible achievement to have done over the last 2 years, almost entirely remotely, with the team working remotely. I think it's really important and significant, and I think it will make a great difference to record keeping at VU. And it has been done in a technical environment that's often, you know, been fraught, and it's certainly one of the most technological innovations and developments and implementations that's happened here over the last year. So I can certainly pass questions on about that if anyone has particular questions. But basically, it's a system that I think is fairly familiar to a number of sectors. Certainly, I've worked with it in other departments and other sectors that I've worked as in records. So about the archives. The archives were actually established 30 years ago in May. Exactly. They're enshrined in the enabling legislation for the then Victoria University of Technology. We hold records dating from all of the university's predecessor institutions. So our records go back to 1915 when the Footscray Technical School was opened. So we have records from the technical school and then the technical college. Then we also have records, obviously, right up to the present day. As a resource, it's important, and it's an excellent manifestation of the history and the development of not only technical education and university education, but secondary school, technical and higher education across the state. It's a very paper-based archive, which distresses me somewhat and frustrates me. We work with I do have a dedicated archival management system, which is very out of date, but nevertheless it is a database that's specifically designed to capture archival information and to capture the context and relationship between archives. So I have dreams about developing that and bringing it into the 21st century. But they are as yet unrealised. And I suppose that one of the challenges of the last 2 years has been that, I think I just want to go back from that. I guess one of the challenges of the last 2 years for me has been, as an archivist, is that actually the work that is to be done, that exists in all archives, and that is the staff of archives really there's always a backlog, and I guess that one of the challenge, the greatest challenge I think is that hasn't been physically addressed in the last 2 years. So it's as if the archives has lost 2 years of work, but on the other hand, it's enabled a lot of consideration about the role of the archive and archives in general. And I think also what I could say is that archives as a profession has risen particularly well and in a very timely way to facing the last 2 years, and also just developing networks and resources that have been enormously helpful to our profession and our sector as well. So I think that yeah, I just sort of wanted to talk then about what we've done as a work group, and I think that this is fairly well reflected across our sector. So we've continued. I do want to go back actually to that. Let me see. Sorry.
You might just be able to use your arrows to go back up or down.
I'm not sure how to go back to that. It's okay. I will work from my notes on that.
We've only got a couple of minutes left.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that what I wanted to say is that we've continued to respond to all of our inquiries and to provide advice and support for to all of our university departments about their record keeping requirements. The archives have done the same. Our records officer has been on site for most of the last 2 years on a very regular basis, so that those day-to-day, everyday records roles have continued, and so have transfers to off-site and on-site storage facilities. The archives have responded to an increase, as have many archives experienced a real increase in inquiries from historical inquiries about old records, family history, from former students, academics, the public. There seems to have been across all sectors of archives this spark in interest, and I guess it's just really that people had time to think about, their relatives or their past, or to work on projects that maybe they had been planning or needing the time for. So there have also been continual requests related to student matters, student completions. I think maybe in part that has been driven by people perhaps taking on further education, so looking for their older records. But that we've been able to do that. And I enclosed a photograph there of the universities, Footscray Technical Schools, not from 1919, with some of the principals and masters from the school, and a lot of nurses and doctors, because in 1919 the Footscray Technical School was turned into a hospital to treat Spanish flu. And the superintendent was, in fact, the principal of the school. And I included that because for about the first month that we all packed up and came home and began to work remotely, that was probably the one image that or the one question or thing that was requested from the archives for all of that time. And I look back now and I felt really concerned that it was exploiting a situation. And I used it with great caution and released it to people with great caution, because I really felt that it was quite tasteless to even draw attention to that at the time. And to an extent, I still feel that. But it is definitely an interesting synergy, I suppose. And I was thinking about how relevant actually it still is, in the sense that VU's heritage still draws on those sorts of experiences, and that we still teach people to be nurses and paramedics and other allied health professionals. And that, in fact, we have offered our premises on different campuses around Victoria for testing and vaccination. So I guess that, you know, it's all really quite cyclical, isn't it? But I'm very happy to take questions. I hope that's been helpful. And yeah, I'm very happy to take questions now, but also to follow up if you want to contact me.
That's great. Thanks, Kim. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A. We've eaten up a bit of time, so we might keep moving forward. But if you feel confident just typing an answer into the Q&A just to have a look at those. Otherwise, I can take note of the questions and pass them on to you.
Yeah, no, I'll have a look at the questions. Thank you. Thank you for thank you for that opportunity. And I'm sorry that it probably isn't exactly as was planned.
Yeah, it's always the way things go, isn't it? So yeah, if you just want to,
it's great. I do. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kim. We'll keep moving on. So we're now joined by, it looks like Michael Holligan from the Environmental Protection Authority, Environmental Protection Agency, I should say. And my agenda has Mary Nezor. I'm not sure if she's joining us as well. Oh yes, I can see her. So Mary Nezor and Michael Holligan from the Environmental Protection Agency are joining us. They both work in the information management area of the EPA, and they're going to talk about utilising Sharepoint as an information asset register. So welcome, Mary and Michael.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I can see. Mary's here. Yep. We can't hear you, Mary.
Doesn't seem to be any sound coming through, Mary. Maybe Michael, if you want to start sharing the screen.
Yep, I can start sharing. Okay, Mary's just come in, and I'm taking over the talking. So yeah, okay, so we're just talking a bit about our information asset register using Sharepoint. So this is something we've had in place for a while. So just to give a bit of an introduction, we basically, I guess to give a bit of a background to us in EPA, well, we are a very small team, the information management team. So we need to try and encourage our staff to be as self-sufficient as possible. So that's where SharePoint is really helpful. There's a lot of smarts that we can use to help people manage their own information assets. So basically, we can't actually share the asset itself due to sensitivity, but we've just got some slides showing you a bit of what people see when they actually have a look at the information asset register. So what you're seeing here is the landing page, so giving people a bit of an introduction to the asset register, what it's for, some links basically that help them navigate the asset register, and then taking them to the business impact level assessment, which is very important. And we've got some general information about how it works. So we have different views of the IAR. So if you've ever used Excel to manage an asset register or any other type of list, there are some similarities. So you can sort and filter your information, but we also have in SharePoint this feature called views, which allows you to group and save views for different audiences. So as some examples here, we've got summary view, custodian and steward view, so you can see which are your assets, so assets that you're responsible for, and an info security view, so you can see assets that have particular sensitivity labels assigned to them. And we've also got some general information. So if I just go to the next slide, this is our guide on identifying significant information assets. So as per OVIC definitions, so we give a bit of an explanation of how to define or what an information asset is, in that it needs to be defined, needs to be manageable, have a certain risk associated and a life cycle. Some of it is useful for people to identify if the asset isn't a significant asset yet, how to actually make it one. So how to turn their information asset into something that can be managed and can be identified. Sometimes it's quite helpful for people to know. Yeah, so there's a bit of info here about what makes an information asset significant, and some instructions on whether you actually need to add an asset to the register, and how to actually go through and do that. So we've got some information about different roles. So as per OVIC requirements, we have stewards and custodians, and we also have administrators as well. So, so the steward obviously is the person who's accountable for the asset. The custodian is probably a lower level person, often a team leader or subject matter expert. And we also have an administrator who might be the person who's actually responsible for assigning access or making updates to the asset itself. They probably wouldn't be updating the asset register themselves, but they're often important as well. So getting into the actual asset register itself, as I mentioned, if you've used Excel, it does have some similarities. So you can sort and filter your information. But the real power of SharePoint is creating different views for different purposes and audiences, and then saving them for easy access. So, for example, our default view is viewing the assets by division or by branch. So you can see that's just the landing view. So you can see our different divisions within EPA. Then you can actually drill down and open up different branches and see which assets are assigned to them. And this is actually based on the steward. So if you're the steward of an asset, you'll be in our list as being a member of, for example, the information technology branch. And then the view will actually show all of the assets that are assigned to that steward. so the steward for the IT branch. So generally that'll be consistent. So it'll be a similar. So for example, the steward in IT is our Chief Technology Officer. So that's all of the assets that are assigned to him. We also have, as I said, views grouping by custodian and steward. So that's very important because as we'll see in the next bit, we require our stewards and custodians to regularly review and update their assets. So being able to see which are your assets that are assigned to you as a custodian or steward, that helps to just filter down which are the ones you're responsible for. And we can also group by sensitivity labels, so we can see which are our sensitive and protected assets. So, as I mentioned, a big advantage of SharePoint is using automated workflows. So, as I said, our team in EPA is very small. There's just really myself and Mary managing our information management and records. So we try and encourage our people to be as self-sufficient as possible. So we use SharePoint's smarts to basically help keep the asset register up to date. So basically how it works is if an asset hasn't been updated in the last 12 months, an email is triggered using SharePoint's Power Automate. That sends an email to the steward, and it reminds them to review and update the asset. So when they go in and update the asset, that basically resets that timer, so it doesn't bother them again. If it isn't reviewed, they will get reminders every month until they review the asset. Now we also get an email as well, so we can monitor that. But we also have a register where we can actually track and monitor who's reviewed their assets and who's outstanding. So if it gets too long, we can chase these people up, and we'll escalate it to our Chief Technology Officer to chase them up, as we are currently doing for a few areas. So it's not just relying on the automation. We're using the automation to assist us and basically help to remind people, and hopefully the people will update their assets themselves. But if they don't, we also have ways of following them up and chasing them up ourselves. So another big aspect of our asset register and what we use SharePoint for is calculating the information sensitivity. So doing a business impact level assessment. And we use Microsoft Forms and Power Automate to do that. So Forms is actually gathering the information, and then we use Power Automate to send people alerts when the assessment has been done. So the steward or custodian can use the BIL tool to enter details. They then email the results, so that's using the Power Automate, and then they enter the results into the asset register. And now we've made the confidentiality, integrity, and availability fields mandatory in the IAR, so everyone has to do that for their assets. And we're also notified of the results, so that we're aware that that's been done. When you go into actually doing the BIL, we've got some information about it. So this is just a screenshot of what people see when they go in to fill in the BIL tool. The tool itself is based on the OVIC BIL table. So it basically just has a bit of a questionnaire. So based on the OVIC BIL table. And that basically, this is just a screen grab, but basically they scroll through the entire form, filling in their details. They then submit it, and then they will get emailed the results at the end. And then they then get the advice to go and fill in those details in the asset register. So that's basically it. I can leave that up, or if people want to stop sharing, I can't see the chat, so I can stop sharing so people can ask questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. There is a question that's come through.
Yep.
Have you found greater business engagement with the list as opposed to Excel?
Yes, definitely. The big advantage of this is it's very visible, and it's easy to sort information and make it relevant to the custodians and the stewards. I think I've come from a previous organisation where we did use an Excel spreadsheet, and I think one of the things that put people off it was just so big, had so many assets on it, and it was, even though you could filter it, it tended to not sort of make it easy for the person viewing the information. Whereas SharePoint, it's because it kind of knows who you are, and it can show you views based on your particular role. So it makes it much easier to digest. Also, having the reminders as well is very important, so we know who's actually engaging and who isn't, so we can chase it up with them.
Great. We've got another question. How do you manage hard copy assets in SharePoint?
Hard copy assets. So well, we can register any asset in the asset register. So it's not necessarily that the asset has to be digital to be in the asset register. So that it's just a matter of entering the details. We do at the moment, just in relation to our hard copy records, we are using a legacy system called CALMS, which we're in the process of migrating into SharePoint. So in future, we'll be able to connect our and we also manage our electronic records already in a SharePoint environment as well. So there is potential in future to sort of link up that record keeping aspect with the asset register.
Great. And a couple more. Everyone's got interest in this topic.
Mm.
Is a history of the IAs retained, for example, if they're decommissioned?
Yes. So we haven't actually got to that point of taking things out of the asset register. We probably haven't got there yet, but with SharePoint, it has version history, so it actually records what changes were made and what was altered. So it keeps that history. As to actually making assets inactive, I guess we haven't got there yet. We'll see how we manage that going forward.
Got a question about how many fields there are for an asset.
Well, we have many. Actually, we're in the process of adding one, or adding a couple around our privacy details. But I actually don't even know how many there are. I haven't counted them. Probably a good 20 or more, probably. There seem to be quite a lot. But the advantage of SharePoint is that using the views functionality, you can hide columns and make that part of the view. So, for example, the sensitivity view is basically concerned around the sensitivity and security of the asset. So you can, when you're looking at that particular view, you're not seeing all of the other fields. So even if we have 30 fields, you can have it so that you're only seeing a handful for any given purpose.
We might we'll squeeze in one more question, and,
Yep.
And then there's a few there perhaps to be answered as well. So they're asking about, do you have the list workflow used for metadata auto tagging records?
Oh yes, we haven't quite got there yet. I think we were looking at it at one point of having the Power Automate automatically fill in the fields. We haven't quite got there yet. I suppose there's a bit of a hesitancy in making it fully automated because we do want the opportunity to check things with a human eye to make sure that it's correct. So yeah, we have considered that, but yeah, we haven't done that quite yet, just to make sure that we have the opportunity to actually review it before it automatically goes into the, particularly with the sensitivity. We do have a lot of people who just assume everything needs to be protected or the highest level. We need to sort of manage that and make sure not everything is going in at the highest level available. So yeah.
Fantastic. So there are a few more questions in the Q&A. I don't know if you can see that, Michael and Mary, but maybe if you have a chance to look at answering those. And then
Yep. Are we able to check them later?
Yeah, I can take note of them. And
Okay. Yeah. If you want to send them through, yeah, that'd be great.
Yep. No problems. All right. Thanks so much. And
Okay.
I'll pass back to Justine.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mary. I know you couldn't speak, but I'm sure you contributed to the slides. And Michael, a very interesting presentation. And as you can see, lots of questions coming in from the audience, so that's great. Okay, so we're on to our last presentation of the day, which is Gabrielle Wolski and Kerry Campbell from Fire Rescue Victoria. They are from the Information Records and Document Management Services at Fire Rescue Victoria, and they're going to be talking about record keeping and amalgamation challenges at Fire Rescue Victoria, which I'm sure will be appreciated by many of you who might have lived through MOG changes and the like. There's always a scramble when it comes to records and information management when the functions of government are moved around. So over to you, Gabrielle and Kerry.
Thanks very much, Justine. You can hear us fine? Perfect. Lovely. I'll just start screen sharing. Okay, thanks everyone. So as Justine mentioned, my name's Gabrielle Wolski. I'm the Manager of Information Records and Document Management Services at FRV. And I've got Kerry Campbell with me, who's the FRV Project Officer. And we're going to talk to you about the record keeping challenges and amalgamation. So just to give you a little bit of background, if you can cast your mind back 2 years ago, I know COVID was happening, but there were some other things happening for the Metropolitan Fire Brigade. And the Metropolitan Fire Brigade had transformed into FRV on the 1st of July 2020 as part of the fire services reform. So Fire Rescue Victoria covers Metropolitan Melbourne now and major regional centres. So what had changed was government had identified that the Metropolitan Fire District had actually grown now. And if you cast your mind to Geelong, start to think about Ballarat, etc., those major regional centres, you can see that they've now got high-rise buildings and other densely populated areas. So therefore there was the need to review the boundaries and to expand them, hence Fire Rescue Victoria was established. Fire services reform provided a unique opportunity whereby two agencies amalgamated. However, CFA was not dissolved and is still in operation. So I think that's quite unique. Usually when organisations amalgamate, or if they have a merger, they merge into one agency whereby we still have CFA and we still partner and work with CFA. So paid CFA operational employees and a number of CFA corporate staff were brought across to FRV. However, CFA is now purely a volunteer service. They still have corporate staff who are paid, but essentially those delivering services on the fire ground are volunteers. So some of the things that we had to think about with fire services reform was really how we're going to manage the records. So we're going to get some records and information coming in, how we're going to do that. So we started thinking about information exchange between the two agencies, particularly around critical day one activities and then business as usual tasks. So critical day one was really thinking about what's going to be required day one, is there a level of risk around not having that information as well? And then thinking about the significance of that risk. So is it a risk to our employees? And is it a risk to the community? And that allowed us to establish our core records listing, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. The other thing that we had to consider is that MFB had a centralised records management model whereby CFA was decentralised. So at MFB, we have a unit of 8-9 staff who manage records, whereas CFA were managing it more on a local level, even though they do have a records manager and a number of staff to support them. But obviously they're a lot bigger and their stations are more widely diversified in different areas. So there was a need for us to consider the implications of both of these models and then thinking about how we can best deliver services to FRV, because what we'd done is we'd now acquired these major regional areas and we had to think about, okay, how are we going to keep these records, how are we going to centralise them, and how are we going to put them into our electronic document management system. So just to give you a little bit of information around the challenges. So the political landscape was challenging, certainly for MFB and CFA. The formation of FRV was not embraced by all parties. I don't know if anyone can remember the Herald Sun. There was a lot of newspaper articles about this and a lot of pushback. And I know some of the firefighters had challenges when they were out in the community, etc. So at times this made it difficult to obtain access to the correct individuals and information in a timely manner. So that was one of the challenges which led to us and some of the complexities that I'll talk about around making some assumptions on how we're going to perform the transition. COVID-19 had also pretty much just kicked off. So we had to adapt to new ways of working and the additional change on top of that. So we had the formation of FRV and the change that was required around that, but also the new ways of working, so working from home, etc. So working at home made it difficult to attend work sites to determine any physical archival holdings. And the building of relationships needed to be undertaken online. So again, if we weren't quite sure of who those individuals were, it then made it difficult to access them and to get that information in a timely manner. But I think we pushed our way through that, didn't we, Kez? Some of the complexities that we also faced and we continue to face is the secondment process. So we had what was previously a CFA employee become an FRV employee, but now be seconded back to CFA. So there's some challenges around that we're still working through with regards to thinking about any work cover claims, any other issues that might arise from that litigation, etc. The role clarity of supporting agencies, both internal and external committees, was not very clear at the time. So there was an Emergency Management Victoria project team who were to support and assist us. However, that got lost in translation, and then there were some internal committees as well, which we didn't have visibility of. And as I mentioned, because of some of these complexities, we had to make a number of assumptions about how we were going to commence work on the transition plan. So what we did was we actually developed a document which identified the day one critical documentation required by FRV for business continuity and ongoing information transfers. So the plan included key areas of what do we know of FRV. And again, we made a number of assumptions around that. We were receiving some information from our executive leadership team and government as well. Then we approached CFA and we started to ask some questions around what do we know of CFA. So that way we could start to think about how we can incorporate the activities around records and information management into FRV, and we consolidated with what we know of MFB, obviously working in that environment. We also started to approach some of the other agencies who had undertaken amalgamations, and we wanted to know what some of their lessons learned were. So we'd approached Ambulance Victoria. A couple of years ago, they had merged the Metropolitan with their rural area. We also approached DELP, Queensland Fire Rescue, Queensland Fire Rescue, and then we'd also approach some of the other local governments as well. So we started to identify what were some of the issues that we needed to think about when we're doing our amalgamation. We also developed an action plan for any key tasks that needed to be performed. We'd also noted that we needed to create a MOU, so a Memorandum of Understanding, and service level agreements around information exchange. And I'll mention that a little bit later on. We also developed a list of core records for consideration for exchange. So we started to identify things whereby, again, we had a focus on business continuity and risk, so risk to the employee and the community. So what were some of the things that we needed? So, you know, the things were around personnel, work cover, any of the assets that we were now taking carriage of, qualifications for our employees that were transitioning across, because we didn't want things whereby we send employees out to specific jobs, but they don't have the qualifications to perform that job, therefore posing a significant risk. You know, other instances whereby we needed information about some of the different locations that we were now servicing because the Metropolitan Fire District had grown bigger, that might be storing hazardous waste and things like that. So again, posing a risk to the community, but making sure that we've got the information day one, that we can progress anything. And then the other thing that we did was we had identified that we actually needed some resourcing to be able to undertake these transition activities as well. So thinking about the guiding principles and standards that we use, so this actually created a basis for the work that we started to perform. It was really around the PROV strategic management standard, the transfer of custodianship as well, the Machinery of Government Information Management Standard, VPDSS, so the Information Asset Register, and thinking about the protective markings as well of the information that was going to come across, and then how we were going to handle that information. So essentially what we did is we created quite a large spreadsheet which had identified each of the different elements of these standards, and we started to work through them around what was compliant, non-compliant, and then how do we fill those gaps and mitigate those areas. Along the way, we held meetings with PROV at nominated intervals to ensure that FRB was providing status updates of progress and meeting the above standards, and particularly if we had any questions around some of the work that we were performing. As I mentioned, we established a Memorandum of Understanding, and this was particularly important in thinking about how we were going to undertake our information exchange process. And we worked with CFA to make sure that they were comfortable with the process as well. So within the MOU, we actually identified and stipulated what that transfer process was going to be. So from start to finish, and Kerry will talk about that because she was involved with actioning the process, how people would request their information, the forms, etc., and guidance notes around that. We also agreed with CFA around service level agreements for information exchange. So things like, you know, what was deemed urgent and what would be the time for receiving that information. And we'd agreed to the timeframes around that, and we make sure that, you know, when we put in any requests that we're seeking to meet those timeframes. We'd also identified the format in which we were to receive the information, both hard copy and electronic, so requesting the electronic documentation to be in a sustainable format. Also identifying the metadata that we required as well, and this was a little bit challenging considering there were a number of business information systems that we were receiving information from, and it's definitely something we're still working on. Identifying the protective markings as well. So the information that's coming across, we're aware of how to handle that information, and maintaining the privacy of the information, and also making sure that we're capturing that in the information asset register. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hand over to Kerry, because Kerry pretty much managed the whole process, as I mentioned, and she's going to talk through the process and the lessons learned.
Hi everybody, just a quick question. How are we going on time? I think we're running over. Do you want me to keep this really brief?
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes. We're eating into the question time, but that's okay.
Okay, cool. Okay, the requests for transfer forms were created. We just used Word documents, so there's no great rocket science around that. We designed it and then sat with CFA and made sure that they were comfortable with the format. The forms had just a little spiel at the top of them that gave some guidance on how to use it. And then it was just broken down into 5 different sections for the user to fill in and then send to the dedicated email address at the bottom. We established our own inbox to receive these request forms. We thought that since we've got a dedicated resource to look after them, we might as well have our own dedicated inbox. And we're a little bit concerned that they might get mixed up with our old BAU stuff that was still coming in. So that worked really well. The centralised transfer register was established. This was an Excel spreadsheet. Gabby spoke to this a little bit earlier. So each request had its own unique number assigned to it and was broken up into a detailed list of what was being required, who owned it, and what SLA had been requested. So I think the most important part about that was just to monitor that and make sure that the SLAs weren't blowing out. Transferring information was established with CFA, and we agreed to use OneDrive to transfer any electronic information between the 2 agencies. And we knew at this stage that more than likely hard copy information wasn't going to be addressed at this stage, so that was not something we needed to think about, but we'll have to think about ongoing. Saving the information into FRV docs. As a request became complete, I'd then have a meeting with our business partners. So if, as an example, it was the property transfer, I'd identify which business partner was looking after that department, have a meeting with them and let them know what information had come through, if it had been saved anywhere already. And then that allowed them to go and have a meeting with their champion in that department, talk about the information that had been transferred and where the best place was to sort that out into Sharepoint. Noting the information being transferred in the information asset register and assigning protective markings. FRV have a dedicated resource for this. So 3 monthly, I think we met, and I'd sit down with this resource and go through the register and identify all the requests that have been processed, and they'd be added into the asset register. And we discussed protective markings, but at this stage they hadn't been identified. The sentencing, we knew right from day dot that the information coming across from CFA wouldn't be sentenced. That wasn't a huge problem for us because we knew that once we got it into our system, the disposal classes would automatically be assigned. So it wasn't really going to cost us too much work. Lessons learned, the resourcing for the activity, that was, I think, the absolute most crucial step that we did. This allowed us to work through the process, the day-to-day process really well, make sure that nothing blew out, and if ever there was a really good point to pass on. If you can resource, it's worthwhile taking the time to get that done. Let's speak to your director and beg, because it's just great. I'd hate to have thought how that process would have worked without having our own dedicated resource. The stakeholder engagement, forming relationships. As Gabby mentioned earlier, identifying who the stakeholders are and how they can help you is really, really important. We had a few issues here, so it made it hard to identify who could help and when they could help. But having said that, I think the relationships formed were pretty good and worked well. Alignment of the information exchange activities and development of the key documentation to support the process. Again, if you need to do this in day one planning, for this to work properly, sit down with the person that you're merging with and plan out what processes you need to do. Otherwise, it's too hard to do it at the end. Some of the things that we should have identified right at the start, I think, was even just something as basic as organising the meetings. Who's going to organise the meetings, how often the meetings will happen, who's going to chair them. I know they sound like really little things, but they're very time consuming. And when you're doing it on the fly, it all eats into time that could have been used more wisely. As Gabby mentioned, the transfer of the metadata was identified but didn't happen, and this was for a few reasons. The decentralised model going into the centralised model was quite difficult to manage, but we had a meeting with the PRO and CFA, and we've all agreed that we'll keep working to that. I think it's important just to identify what hasn't worked properly or still needs ongoing treatment and move on. Information protective markings, again, we had a meeting about that's been listed in the asset register and is ongoing. Instructions about the information exchange process could have been more broadly communicated to staff. We probably made this harder for ourselves, but being in the environment we were in, and it's very political and people weren't happy about what was happening, we chose not to communicate with all staff. We identified to communicate with business managers and let them communicate with the staff, and that worked quite well for us, but again it was a bit more time consuming. Requirement to review and modify the MOU, that's probably that's going to be individual to everybody. We didn't do it during the process, but we did it once we moved into the BAU environment, and I don't think there was a lot of changes made because the MOU worked really well. So CFA were happy to carry that on, and it works well during the BAU process as well. So that's pretty much it from me. Sorry to rush that through.
No worries. So I think that just takes us to any questions.
Great, thank you. There's a couple of questions that have come through. So amalgamations are not always successful, but the FRB CFA process looks as if it went well. Do you have any ongoing challenges?
I think really for us it's that metadata which is really problematic, and I think we just have to continue working on that. And as I said, those political sensitivities can make it quite challenging. If people have personal views about whether or not the amalgamation should have occurred, etc., there's a change management piece that should happen around that, so people feel more engaged and that the amalgamation should occurred, and therefore more willing to provide information that's required to continue business services.
And also physical information. It wasn't really addressed. COVID-19 didn't help that situation. There was a little brief interlude there where we were able to get out, and we took full advantage of that and went out and visited some fire stations. And there's a lot of physical information still sitting at stations, And CFA and ourselves agreed that, you know, on a date of when this, who's going to own what information, where it'll live and what will stay. But there's a lot of work to be done in that space still.
Fantastic. There's a couple more questions. I might pass them along to you to answer, and we'll wrap up there.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle and Kerry. Always an interesting and challenging situation to work through, but it sounds like you've achieved quite a lot. So thank you, everyone. That concludes today's presentation. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for presenting today, and I look forward to seeing you all again at a future RMN. So thanks, everyone.